So this will be an installation guide on a fuel pin for a 300 TDI Bosch fuel injector. Now I already have one in mind, but being the cheapskate that I am, I did buy a cheap one out of Poland that is a bit worn, and we'll see that later. So I've ordered a new one from Steg Supplies. Comes with some grease and the safety pin. Now this part here attaches to the diaphragm on the top of the fuel injector, and then boost from your turbo moves the diaphragm up and down. As this fuel pin moves up and down, there's a pin that meets it here, and that changes the fueling profile. So the pin that in the fuel pump would be where this pin is. It's moved in and out by the fuel pin moving up and down, and that changes the amount of fuel going to your injectors. So let's go to the car and see how we can install this. So here we are in the engine bay of the 300 TDI Defender, and we'll just look at some of the things we've done before putting the boost pin in. So we've got the upgraded intercooler. You can see it just popping its head above the shroud there. We've got the Alice Sport VNT turbo, and one of the problems with this is you can see it leaks at the exhaust horns. Initially that was a really bad leak. It would whistle until the engine got hot, so it would whistle for about an hour. I ended up having to tap the horns a bit to expand them, wedge them with some sealant, and after a few attempts it's sealed a bit better, but you can still see some blow by. Over here we have a exhaust temperature gauge, pre-turbo, and exhaust temperature gives us a good indicator of the thermal stress that the engine is experiencing, so we can see how much stress we're putting our engine in with every modification. Another small modification on the 300 TDI, the exhaust is on the passenger side, and against the firewall here we get a high pressure flow of air when we're traveling at speed, and that helps to heat up the firewall and reduce airflow through the radiator and intercooler. So what I've done, I've cut a hole in the panel and I've put a little vent, a bit like the Range Rover, and what that allows is more airflow to come through the radiator and intercooler, wash out the exhaust heat, and exit via the side. And I found that this modification alone dropped DGTs, that's the exhaust gas temperature, by about 50 degrees. This is an Australian spec TDI, so you'll notice the air conditioning pump over here. So if you were to fit the boost ring down there, you'd have to move the pump out of the way. But today we're fitting the boost pin, and that's in this plate here. And for better access, we'll just be moving the overflow tank out of the way. So I'll do that, and then we'll go back to filming. So to access the pin, we need to remove this top cover. You'll notice here, there's the air line from the turbo, that's the boost. The diaphragm is in there, which we're going to see shortly, and that moves up and down, and the pin is attached to that. So let's remove that. Okay, so we remove these 4 screws. If they're hard to remove, you might find that tapping the screwdriver with the hammer on the end can just jar the screw a little bit and loosen it. It's just what happens sometimes when screws go through aluminium. Okay, so simply remove the top, and there's the diaphragm, and there's the old pin. attached to the diaphragm. A spring in there pushes it up, and then boost pressure on the diaphragm pushes it down. And if we can get a good look here at this El Cheapo pin, we can see a deep groove that's worn into it. So that shouldn't happen, and that's because of inferior materials. I bought this one out of Poland. Okay, what we're going to do is undo the screw here and bolt in the new screw pin. So what you'll notice on the top plate here is a little punch hole that indicates the front. So we make sure that the front lines up with that. There's a flat piece there, so we can undo it. And there we go, that's the old pin. That's the diaphragm. You might just want to inspect it for any damage. This one looks good. So here's the new pin. In there. The washer on the top, and then the nut. Do it up. Find the pin. Punch hole. Rotate it, just make sure it's all lined up. And do it up. Okay, now looking inside the pump, you can see that. So at the bottom there is a star wheel, and rotating the star wheel changes the preload on this spring. So it brings the spring further up or further down to increase resistance. And undoing the lock nut at the top and adjusting that Torx screw adjusts the starting position on here. Now the original pin has got a variable pitch around it, so depending on which way you rotate the pin, you would have a different profile, and it would, so there's a variety of profiles around the face of the pin. So that's why that dot is more important in if you're using the original Bosch pin. And these other adjustments you might read about in fine-tuning the TDI. They're for getting the optimal flow and resistance on the original pin. So using a boost pin eliminates a lot of that trouble. So there we go, we're back in there. Our dot is at the front. A little bit of grease on the face of it to let the pin slip nicely. Put the cover back on. Just get the 4 screws started. Nip them up, and that's it.